Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome Dale again and to say a few words of introduction about him. He'll be a familiar name to many of you, and I certainly hope you are able to take advantage of the ready availability of his books. We'll have, as I mentioned earlier, a book signing at about 1:45. It'll start over there during the lunch break. Ahlquist has been described as probably the greatest living authority on the life and work of G.K. Chesterton. And this judgment was offered by Joseph Pearce, no minor authority himself on Chesterton. I learnt recently that somebody described a long-time member who's a family member of the Australian Chesterton Society and his family, all of whom are great devotees, and she said that they're Chesterton Swifties. And I was not familiar with that term and of course attributed a very different meaning to the word until it was explained that this has to do with the dear tailor. So I think anyhow Dale, I can transpose it and say he's the world's foremost Chesterton Swiftie. And he's not going to be pulling one, I can be quite sure of that. I'd just like to highlight briefly two key things, it seems to me, about Dale that testify to his qualities and his achievements. The first is the spirit that he imparts to the life of the Chesterton Society that he founded nearly 30 years ago, and for so long has been the full-time president. I think that's a creative spirit that he imparts, not one of embattlement, creative. It's a spirit of service. Dale always signs his emails, "Your servant, Dale," which I've always thought is lovely. And it's a spirit of friendship and fellowship, which radiates out and has now reached our shores. So that's the first. The second thing is that the spirit has a body, well, a number of bodies actually, and the publications and media appearances I'm thinking of that Dale is responsible for. There's the bi-monthly that he publishes and edits, Gilbert magazine, that some of you would have seen. This comes out every 2 months. It's a wonderful publication full of rich articles and thoughts, lots of Chesterton excerpts and articles, but lots of others by different Chestertonians. There's the various books he's written, 6 books, ones that he's edited or written introductions for, and I suspect they're almost uncountable. And then there's the media programs and appearances, such as the EWTN series that he did for many years, G.K. Chesterton, the Apostle of Common Sense, which is a great phrase, I think, a great description that Dale has coined about Chesterton, the Apostle of Common Sense. But he's given nearly 1,000 lectures at conferences and universities, and now is adding to that with his visit to Australia. There's the great network of Chesterton schools, of course, another body in which this, to which the Spirit has given great life. And he inspired this network, now more than 70 Chesterton schools, most of them in the United States, others elsewhere that he'll talk about in his paper. But he founded the first school in 2008 in his home city of Minneapolis, and particularly in recent years they've just flourished and been started by different parents groups who are wanting this form of education as an option for their children and those of the families they know. But anyhow, that's the special focus of his presentation here this morning. So it's a wonderful pleasure to welcome Dale to give his paper this morning. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Carl, for the very warm introduction. Thank you for the invitation to come and join you here for the Chesterton Conference in Australia. And it's a great pleasure to meet all of you and to be with you. This universal spirit of G.K. Chesterton is always a thrill. To be here for what is for me the other side of the world, and to see Chesterton's impact here, and we do share a spirit of joy and levity. We don't take ourselves too seriously. That's our great strength. Angels fly because they take themselves lightly. And so I've already had a marvelous time here in Australia. It was one of the great thrills for me since I came was to be reunited with my luggage. It was a 37-hour separation, and it was good. Carl was able to requisition some toothpaste for me, so I didn't have to just wait for my own toothpaste to arrive. That was a thrill as well. I'd like to start by answering the two questions that were asked of Carl at the end of his talk, because I think they're in some ways, I don't know, a good launch pad for what we're talking about. I'll answer the second one first. What would Chesterton have thought of the monarchy? Well, G.K. Chesterton definitely believed in democracy. That was, for him, the highest form of government. It can only work on a small scale, however. If it becomes too large, it turns into a representative government, and the first thing that a representative does is he stops representing. And so he really meant by democracy the direct rule of the people. He says it's the oldest form of government. It's a government truly by consent and not by coercion. He said the rise of the kingdom in the Middle Ages was similar in some respects to a democracy in Chesterton's opinion, because the king would have been an ally of the people against the aristocracy. And the king actually didn't, in the old monarchy, the king would have relied not on the aristocracy, but on the popular support of the people, and he had the love of the people. And that actually kept the aristocracy in check. That was lost, of course, as kingdoms got bigger, and of course with the Protestant Reformation too. And in fact, in England, when it was the cause of the English Reformation, with the monarchy had become too powerful. So that's the answer to that question. But of course, that brings up government in general, which brings us to the first question that was asked. I'm absolutely fascinated by the interest in the American election here in Australia. In some cases, it seems even greater than our ability to talk about it in America, because in America people are almost afraid to talk about it because people are so polarized. It's absolutely stunning and troubling how friends and families have become separated from each other because they simply cannot even have a conversation. They aren't able to discuss rationally with each other about the political situation. And almost everyone who I've talked to has said, "Are you going to get back in time to vote?" But I have already voted, so everyone just relax. But I think one of the points that struck me is, it is a very, most of the time when there's an election, there really isn't a choice. You're not really getting much difference between the candidates. Nothing much is going to change. Here there's clearly a vast difference between the candidates. Whether anything will change, of course, always remains to be seen, whoever gets elected. And a quote of Chesterton comes to mind, which always happens with me for some reason. A quote of Chesterton comes to mind. He wrote a book in 1910 called What's Wrong with the World. And in that book, he identifies the 4 things that are wrong with the world: big government, big business, feminism, which he calls a hatred of motherhood, and public education. 1910, he said that. In the wake of writing that book, however, he was asked by a magazine called TP's Weekly to write an article called What is Right with the World, and to not take that negative tone about what's wrong with the world. And so he wrote a marvelous piece called What is Right with the World. And this is the conclusion of that essay. For at present, we all tend to make one mistake. We tend to make politics too important. We tend to forget how huge a part of a man's life is the same under a sultan or under a senate, under Nero or St. Louis. Daybreak is a never-ending glory. Getting out of bed is a never-ending nuisance. Food and friends will be welcomed. Work and strangers must be accepted and endured. Birds will go bedwards, and children won't, to the end of the last evening. There's a danger in the reformer who denounces everything, who agitates for improvement or change, but in the end only propagates his own agitation. There is a danger in that modern phrase, divine discontent. There's a truth in it also, of course, but it's only a truth of a special and secondary kind. Much of the quarrel between Christianity and the world has been due to this fact, that there are generally 2 truths, as it were, at any given moment of revolt or reaction. And the ancient underlying truism, which is nevertheless true all the time. It is sometimes worthwhile to point out that black is not so black as it is painted, but black is still black and not white. So with the merits of content and discontent. It is true that in certain acute and painful crises of oppression or disgrace, discontent is a duty. And shame could call us like a trumpet. But it is not true that man should look at life with an eye of discontent, however high-minded. It is not true that in his primary naked relation to the world, in his relation to sex, to pain, to comradeship, to the grave, or to the weather, man ought to make discontent his ideal. That is black lunacy. Half his poor little hopes of happiness hang on his thinking a small house pretty, a plain wife charming, a lame foot not unbearable, and bad cards not so bad. The voice of the special rebels and prophets recommending discontent should, as I have said, sound now and then and suddenly like a trumpet. But the voices of the saints and the sages recommending contentment should sound unceasingly like the sea. Beautiful passage. I think I'll quit right there. Carl, when he went through the itinerary with me, we did some sort of trans-Pacific call together where we could actually see each other's faces and watch each other's lips move. Told me what I would be doing while I was here in Australia. He says, you'll be giving a talk to the students, talk about the Chesterton Schools Network, and then you'll be having a dinner with the Archbishop and some leaders of school reform with Tim Mitchell, and talk about the Chesterton Schools Network. And then you'll be giving a talk at Tim Mitchell School, Hartford College, and talk about the Chesterton Schools Network. And then you'll be speaking at the Chesterton Conference and talk about the Schools Network there at that. And then you'll be going up to Brisbane to give a talk at the St. John Henry Newman College that they're getting started up there. talk to them about the Chesterton Schools Network. And I said, well, Carl, this is great. I've got 18 talks, but they're all just one talk. That's fantastic. So if some of you have heard anything that I'm going to say now, if you've heard it before, just act like you're hearing it for the first time. Do laugh at the right places, and encourage the people around you, because this is where you laugh. This is where he said something that's worthwhile. And nod in a meaningful way when I make certain profound points, even if you've heard them before, because that gives me a reason to stay awake. So I've had just an amazing experience having started the Chesterton Society in America, just taking my own passion and following it till it totally took over my life, and the great joy of sharing Chesterton with other people, getting them as excited about this really once in a millennium writer who still speaks the truth today as he did 100 years ago, as Carl pointed out so well in his remarks on Chesterton's prophecy. And I've just lived to infect other people. And that has been with just great results. And I'll talk about that, I guess, tonight at the dinner, some of the effects that are just worldwide. But the most unexpected and unpredicted thing that ever happened was when I got involved with starting a high school in Minneapolis, and somehow was able to join two what seemed to be not the same interests or missions together by bringing in the Chesterton Society to help support and start the first Chesterton Academy in the world at that point. And we had only planned to start one school. I was just the co-founder of the school myself. I said, he was willing to put some money in to helping start the school. I said, I have no money, but I can give you the support of the Chesterton Society, which is a broad base of support, and we could give ourselves a national profile on day one because of the reach of the Chesterton Society, and I think it would be a good way to get a broader base of support. And I said, besides, G.K. Chesterton is the model thinker that we're trying to emulate. By making it a Chesterton Academy, we are going to try to make our students into the complete thinker that G.K. Chesterton is. Carl had that great phrase where he says he's a one-man liberal arts curriculum, right? That's I think how you described a beautiful phrase. And because Chesterton wrote about everything, but more importantly, he put it all together. And what we wanted to do was have a very integrated curriculum so that what we taught in one class was actually connected to what we were teaching in another class. The problem with modern education today, the modern progressive approach, is simply each subject taught with really no connection to any other subject that's taught. So our students learn to think in fragments. They don't have a cohesive way of thinking. They don't put it together because they're not taught to put it together. And so as a result, they think in fragments, and if you happen to listen to them talk, they talk in fragments. They can't have a complete thought, and they can't have a complete sentence. They've been robbed of a complete vocabulary, so they just use one word to substitute for about 10,000 words that would be more useful, but they just use the word like. A word that doesn't mean anything. A word that adds nothing to your sentence. It doesn't add anything to the beauty and goodness of the world. All it is a vacant noise in the middle of what should be a comprehensible sentence. And so one of the very first things we do with our student is we just beat the hell out of them until they stop saying the word like. And in about 2 years, they're saying it again. So but it is indicative of what is like the problem, you know? that we have to teach students how to think. And that's what we wanted to do by starting at Chesterton Academy. So we put together a very good and integrated curriculum. We put together a classical curriculum. But of course, you know what you should do if you ever find yourself stranded in the middle of a jungle, 600 miles from the nearest town and the nearest sign of civilization. Do you know what you should do? Start a Chesterton Academy. Because if you do, 3 people will show up immediately saying, that's not how you do classical education. And so what we think classical education is may not be what everyone else thinks, but there is actually some continuity among those who even disagree with each other. We certainly start with classical thinkers. We certainly teach Latin, the classical language. And we certainly emphasize truth, goodness, and beauty, so that is present in everything that we teach. So we start them out right away, their 9th grade year, and you'll have to forgive the cultural translations. We use the word freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. That would be 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grades. So if you can adjust to that thinking, I'll try not to confuse you too much. But so 9th grade, their first year of high school, they start by reading the Iliad. They start with the Old Testament in theology class. They start reading Plato in philosophy class. They start with studying ancient art in the art class. And we take a chronological approach through the 4 years that they are at Chesterton Academy, so that in philosophy they'll go to Aristotle and then Thomas Aquinas and then watch the descent of philosophy as it goes down the drain completely. But they'll know exactly why and where it failed to develop the modern mess that we're in as we rejected truly the greatest of all thinkers who ever lived, Thomas Aquinas. And then we do the same thing with literature. We study the ancient literature through the medieval and late medieval and early modern writers. And we study history, the whole story that got us to where we are. And they're all connected to each other, so it's pretty much what's going in one class will be connected to what's being taught in another class. But we also have it connected to one other truth that informs everything we teach, and that is the incarnation. That's the central truth. That's the thing we're teaching in every other class. So we have a theology class, but we're still, when we study literature, we're studying how that relates to the incarnation, the work of literature that we're reading. When we study history, we're studying the story of salvation. We're studying what leads up to Jesus and how everything changes when Christ steps onto the stage, how history changes and how nothing can be explained in history unless Jesus is who he said he was. He's the hinge of history. So, and then, literature is just simply the retelling of the historical story in a fictional form. And art is all connected to the incarnation. It's the most incarnational of all experiences. Yeah, we study science. We study the hand of God. When we're studying science, we're looking at creation. We're looking at the mind of God, the design and the beauty that he put into the created world, the order that he put into the created world. Because there's no way to explain it unless an orderly mind was behind it. There's no way to even trust it unless there's order to it. And we know that it's not random because it's not random. And we know that there's a story being told, and if there's a story, there's a storyteller. We know that there's meaning to life, and meaning must have someone to mean it. And so that incarnational truth is in everything we're teaching. It's all connected. We give as much emphasis to the arts as we do to the sciences. And that's not to de-emphasize math and science. It's to simply elevate the arts to its proper place. Most schools today, all the emphasis is on tech, on STEM, on you have to know science and math because you're not going to get a good job afterwards. Guess what? You're going to be miserable with the job you get if all you study is math and science. You're going to be the most miserable person because you haven't looked at the deeper meaning of life. And you haven't studied art enough. And you don't appreciate truth, goodness, and beauty. That's the only thing that makes science and math worthwhile. And so you have to emphasize those things. And, we find too that our graduates, when they go into engineering, I have a son who got an engineering degree. The reason he got into a pretty selective engineering school was that he wasn't just a math and science geek. He could play the piano. He could do artistic things. He could write and be creative. And that's what the engineering school was looking for, because the engineering school themselves realized that we don't want a bunch of math and science geeks. We want people who can express themselves. There's nothing worse than an engineer who can't communicate. That's a bad thing. And so, we study, every student learns how to draw and paint. Every student. They study drawing and painting for 4 years so that by their 4th year they are copying oil masterpieces. How is that possible? Because art is a skill. You can actually teach it. You can teach the skill. You don't teach them to be an artist by giving them a paintbrush and a canvas and say, make beauty for me. Just express yourself, whatever you want. No, you start by saying, this is what you're going to have to paint. You see that? That's going to be on your canvas when you're done. And it's going to take you 4 years to do it. And they come out with the thrill of having been skillfully creative. They all learn how to sing. They all learn how to chant. They're chanting music that was sung 700, 800, 900 years ago. The same music. And they're not doing it just for entertainment. They're actually doing that music in the setting in which it was intended to be used, in Mass, because we have daily Mass. It's the center of the day. And some of the schools like ours, they have daily confession as well. And when there's an extra priest, there's 2 lines of confession. I love those little sinners. It's great to see them in line every day. It gives me hope for the world. Yeah, and so, and then we do drama, required. Not just an after-school activity. Every student is required to be in 3 plays. Their 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year. And my wife, who runs the drama department at our school, and as I've pointed out before, who also runs the drama department at our home, she says that drama is the most Christian of the arts. Because it's about dying to yourself and rising again as a new creature that someone else has designed for you to be. It's giving up yourself. It's sharing yourself with your fellow actors. It's helping them all work together just as the body of Christ has to work together, with each person playing their separate role. And if one part suffers, they all suffer. And they all triumph together. It's a bonding experience. And it is, of course, the most incarnational of the arts. It's just literally the Word becoming flesh. So yeah, the arts are so much a part of a curriculum teaching truth, goodness, and beauty. So truth, the truth. As Chesterton says, there's only one subject. There's only one subject. And that truth affects everything else. But there's also those little surprising truths that we learn along the way, which is why we teach Chesterton, who teaches us that truth comes as a surprise. Truth is not what we expect. It's paradoxical. It's sometimes the opposite of what we expect. If we were to design the world, we wouldn't design God visiting the world as a helpless baby. We certainly wouldn't design the world as God dying painfully on a cross. That's not how we would have written the story. But the truth, Chesterton says, is not, it's stranger than fiction because we've made fiction to suit ourselves. But he says the truth is also more blood-curdling than fiction. And the truth is not only stranger than fiction, it's saintlier than fiction. And he says truth is real, while fiction has to be realistic. And he says truth might lead us to strange places, but it's always going to be the truth that leads. Truth, goodness, and beauty. And goodness, one of the things that thrills students, I've watched it happen over and over again, is when they study Plato, their first year of philosophy. They see that from Plato, they learn that there's a connection between virtue and happiness. That if you are good, you will be happy. And they're getting this not from some moralistic teacher teaching them in theology class. No, they're getting this from a pagan philosopher who has thought about these things, putting those words in Socrates' mouth. If you are good, you will be happy. There's a connection between virtue and happiness. And so we teach virtue at the school, and we give them chances to live out their virtue. Chesterton says man is never fully at home except in goodness. Man is never fully at home except in goodness. And he says every hateful thing is a mimicry of something that is good. And that is what the world teaches, is that the world teaches that the bad things are good. But they're trying to mimic the good as they teach those things. And he says to see good is to see God. To see good is to see God. And then beauty. I've already mentioned the arts. Dostoevsky says beauty will save the world. Chesterton has a corollary to that. He says beauty is unanswerable. Beauty is unanswerable. We can make great arguments defending the faith. We can live virtual lives, and people may or may not be affected by it. They may even attack us for goodness, for righteousness, for justice. They may suffer because of goodness. But beauty is unanswerable. There is not an argument against beauty. It simply transforms. And so what has the modern world done? It's just created a lot of ugliness. That's how it's combated the great effect of beauty, is by building ugly buildings, by touting ugly images as art, by giving us ugly music to listen to, and by making the models, the women who are supposed to be the models of beauty, making them horrific to look at. Yeah. So, beauty is unanswerable. So that was the philosophy of putting together the schools. And then we just had that one school that we were going to do, and then people started coming to us and saying, well, Dale, we want to do what you're doing. And we said, we don't know what we're doing. We had such a great advantage in starting a school in that we went into it innocent and ignorant and not even knowing which rules we were breaking when it came to education. We just simply knew that something was desperately wrong with education. It just was so painfully evident that our schools were failing. They were just utterly failing. And even, sadly, the Catholic schools were failing along with the public schools. Why? Because they were simply imitating the public schools with the addition of a religion class that may or may not have been teaching the Catholic faith. And of course, the other thing is that they were all expensive. It was just an expensive way to make your child ignorant. And in 1937, Robert Hutchins, who was the president of the University of Chicago, one of the creators of the Great Books program, along with Mortimer Adler, gave a talk to the National Catholic Education Association, 1937. And he says, this is not a Catholic gentleman who's giving this talk. This is a respected academic president of the University of Chicago. He says, the Catholic Church has the longest intellectual tradition in the world. And yet the Catholic schools are only mimicking what is being taught in the public schools. They are using the lowest form of education available, which is what is being used in the public schools, instead of embracing the great intellectual heritage they have. He said that in 1937. So fortunately, everything changed after that, and there was great reform in Catholic education, and I never had to start a Chesterton Academy. That was the track that was supposed to happen. And so, it's just completely worse than it was in 1937. And we realize there are no top-down solutions. If we're going to change education, we have to do it ourselves. Parents who are concerned about their kids' education can't wait for another better school to come along. They have to start one themselves, because their kids are only eligible to go to school for a few years. You can't wait for the solution because it's going to be too late for your student. And obviously, the most control you have as a parent is to do homeschooling. But at a certain point, even the parent, especially the mother who's going to be running it full-time, is going to be overmatched. And they need the help of other good, like-minded Catholic parents who stand together and start a school, which is what we did. And we put together a model. So we said, okay, this is how we did it, and we helped another group of people start a Chesterton Academy. And even while we were doing it, we were helping another one because someone else came along. And the first school, 2007, the second one started in 2014. And the third and fourth one also started in 2014. We were helping 3 people at once, 4 people at once. And one of our first board members said, gives this great image, we were rubbing 2 sticks together. And all of a sudden, a group of people formed around us trying to keep warm. that's how it happened. We said, who are these people? We're starting a school. Why do they think we know what we're doing? But we did. It turns out, by the grace of God, we came up with a model that really worked, that they could implement where they were. And all of a sudden, more and more people were able to start their own schools. And the beauty of these things is they're all locally started. We didn't start any of them. We started the first one. We just helped the other folks start theirs where they were. And in 10 years, 60 schools have started. And all locally started, locally funded, locally run. But we use the same curriculum, the same templates, the same philosophy. We all insist, all the faculty takes an oath of fidelity to the magisterium. They all have to have daily mass. They have to keep Christ at the center of the school. And when parents and visitors walk into our school, the first thing they experience is joy. They hear laughter from the classrooms. We had a transfer student come into the school once, and she said, I wrote it down. It was that good. She said, when she came, she was met with a flood of joy. She said, Jesus is present at this school. We just have watched lives being transformed. It's only done with humility. You can't accomplish anything unless you just forget about yourself. And the reason why G.K. Chesterton is the patron of these schools is because he's the model of humility. The late, great Aidan Mackey called him a tower of humility. And that spirit, his joy, his goodness, that is what has helped create all these schools around the country. And just in the last day, I was signing contracts on the internet with a new school in Japan, in South Africa, and in Spain. And we're about to get one going here in Brisbane with Tim Mitchell, and we're looking forward to the first Chesterton Academy in Australia. This is how we change the culture from the ground up. There are no top-down solutions. There just aren't. Which brings me back to that question that was asked of Carl about the political situation in America. It doesn't matter who wins the election in one sense, because our duty is the same no matter who wins. We have to take care of our families, take care of our schools, wherever we are, whether our culture is going to continue on this downward spiral and finally go off the edge, or if we have this revival and everything turns around and we do have the reestablishment of a Christian society again. What we do remains exactly the same. We have to teach the truth to our children, teach the faith to our children, form their hearts and their minds in the truth and in Jesus Christ. And we will do that if we have to do it from the ruins of a fallen civilization, or if we do it as part of a revival that gets us back to Christendom. And it's a great pleasure to have been able to be inspired to do this because I just read G.K. Chesterton. God bless you. Thank you. How much time do we have to answer that?
We've got about 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, questions?
Yeah, this better be good, because if it's not a good question, I'm cutting you off, okay?
All right.
All right.
That's reasonable. Vivek, can I say his last name? Ramaswamy. Yeah. And he proposed part of his policy, and there's a chance he'll become the education minister or whatever they call it over there, was to totally abolish the federal education department. So 2 questions. Do you think that could happen, and would it be a fabulous thing if it did?
So Ronald Reagan promised he was going to abolish the education department, and he was the president who followed the president who established the U.S. Department of Education. So it was still new enough to be dismantled. It would have been a relatively easy task, because he promised to do it. And he appointed a very good guy as his Secretary of Education, William Bennett, very profound Catholic gentleman who liked G.K. Chesterton and everything. And one day someone was standing in front of him in his office saying, "You said you were going to take down the Department of Education." And William Bennett said, "Yeah, it's easier when you're on that side of the desk than when you're on this side of the desk," which is a completely wimpy answer, right? Yes, the answer is yes. It would be great if we eliminated the National Department of Education, and it would be a step towards making education local again and having it controlled locally. The next thing we'd have to do away with is the State Department of Education. And get it back to local school districts, so that the local school board, composed of parents whose kids are actually attending the school and not by a bunch of activists who get themselves elected to the school board, who don't care about parents, that's the only way. There's only going to be a grassroots local solution. But as long as you have a strong centralized Department of Education, the schools will just continue to degrade. Yeah. Will it happen?
you obviously made the decision to be high school. What's the impact of not starting in elementary school? It sounds like maybe you get fed by a lot of homeschoolers, so maybe it's less, but if you've got someone that's gone through 8 years of elementary state education, how does that impact when they come to your schools?
Yeah, sure. We started a high school because that was what we needed at the time. We had a very good parish school, just a fine, faithful, and educationally, intellectually well established parish school, and our kids were going there to those schools, and we felt very happy. In fact, we went to our parish priest and said, can't we just extend this school 4 more years and just keep the same thing going? He says, oh, the bishop would never let me do that, you know. And so we said there's no other option, so we just need to start a new high school. But so our feeder schools are good parish schools, and a lot of homeschoolers, yes. But then there's a good segment that are coming from other sources, whether it's a private school or a public school, because those parents have just finally fed up with what their kids are experiencing in school. So we are drawing from a variety of students to get to the high school. We only started a high school because that's what we needed. And I usually get asked every time I give a talk, like you just almost did right now, well, why don't you have a K through 8 school? And then they said, why don't you have a college too, or a university too? I said, well, yeah, I'll do that tomorrow before breakfast. I'll get one of those going. Question right there.
Daniel, I wonder if I could draw upon 2 strands, one that Carl touched on earlier and what you touched on. Carl touched on technology, and it can be a mixed bag as to how that plays out. You touched on the Catholic intellectual tradition and its consistency over time. I've noticed that there is now a quite considerable use of technological platforms to project Catholicism. And obviously one of your confreres is Bishop Robert Barron nearby. There are others obviously like EWTN, Scott Hahn, Matt Fradd, the Australian, who are all using these platforms now to project the Catholic message. I just wonder what you make out of that, and whether it is having a big impact and helping the Catholics' message to get out there, even beyond the Catholic Church.
Good, thank you for that question. Thomas Aquinas says there's no bad things, only bad uses of things. And the internet and the media is a perfect example. It itself is neutral. It's been used for very bad things, but it has also been used for very good things, and you've just given some prime examples. And yeah, people's lives have been changed for the good because of what they've been able to access in ways that they would not have otherwise been able to get to that rich material. So yeah, we do live in that electronic age, and we should try to make good use of it. Just like we should try to make good use of AI and not just condemn this form as something evil. No, we need to baptize it and use it for good. Put it in our quiver of arrows. But also use it as a shield. However, when it comes to education, we don't have technology in our classrooms. The kids are off the screens for 8 hours a day. And that not only makes them better thinkers and more focused in their learning, but it gives their minds a break from that electronic stimulation. It gives them a chance of silence. And that's become a very important aspect of our approach, is that we just use books. Admittedly, it is a technology that was developed in 1540 or 1450 rather. But we're going to give that technology a little more time to develop. The printed word. Yes?
If you were developing a curriculum for earlier years, do you have any thoughts about what you would do? Because you've described the structure of the current arrangement from your 9-12. Would you just cycle through it, or would you do something else?
Well, I would certainly put much greater emphasis on reading and writing and simple arithmetic to develop, basic brain skills. That is being done right now because we have students coming into our school who can't read and write and do arithmetic. We lost 2 years of education through COVID. Not just the 1 year we were shut down, but the year, whatever the students learned before that was lost too. And but they just kept pushing them through, and they are not well educated right now. Hopefully we'll, get through that whole cycle, but anything I would do would be to really emphasize verbal skills to the young students, so that they know grammar. In fact, I've got another quote here. It's a good one. I wrote it down. G.K. Chesterton. Some of the most enormous and idiotic developments of our modern thought and speech arise simply from not knowing the parts of speech and the principles of language. The answer to most modern sophistries can be found in a book of Latin grammar or English grammar. The modern laxity of language has had a great deal to do with the ultimate laxity of conduct. So that's what I would do. All right. Yes?
Thank you for the talk. You spoke very movingly on the transcendentals and the way that you educate the students to use those things. I myself went through public and private school systems here, both. I'm kind of wondering, do you find that your students have an appreciation for what they're being educated in? Not just that they access beauty, truth and goodness, but that they have a conscious appreciation of the fact that that is the education they're receiving. Because when I came here to Campion, the interconnectedness of the subjects does help that, but for me it's almost a kind of consciousness of that because I haven't received it before. Do you find that your students might take it for granted, or do you find them generally to be appreciating the uniqueness of what they're receiving?
So we do try to teach them that they are being given a very integrated education. We're trying to make them see that, what you're studying here is connected to what you're studying here. We try to repeat that fact. We try to repeat the fact that we are emphasizing the transcendentals. But of course they end up taking it for granted. So that's why you try to repeat it. It's interesting how when they get to their final year and they look back on the 4 years of formation that they've had, all of a sudden they see, oh yeah, that's why we studied this, because that is connected to this. And we make them, write a paper of reflection on how what they learned in this class did help them understand what they studied in another class. So yeah, it's a danger they're going to take it for granted. We do try to remind them. Yes?
In commencing a project where you didn't know actually what you were doing, and continually, how did you find the teachers with the cover to teach that marvellous range of skills that you described?
Well, one of the favorite stories I love telling is the year we opened the school, we had more applications for teachers than we had for students. There were teachers who were just dying to be part of something like this because they were so frustrated in the schools where they were, or they simply did not want to teach in a school where the system was so anti-Catholic and anti-intellectual. So they brought great strengths to us, and we found that there was a huge resource out there that we were able to tap. Now with the growth of the schools, it's going to be a challenge to find more teachers, except for the fact that we keep finding them. And also, we're at the point now where we've had enough graduations and graduate classes that have gone on to good colleges and universities that we're able to tap them to come back and teach. And we have major Catholic universities who are actively recruiting our students. And in turn, then we actively recruit their students. It's a cycle that we're creating. Yes?
Thank you, Dale. My only sort of, most challenging question I'll have today, but I'm here because I'm thrilled about the growth of classical education and I'm hoping to see that continue. Did you ever explore in your decision to set up the schools, did you ever explore, for example, the International Baccalaureate or other perhaps more proximal educational pathways as a vehicle to achieve the outcomes, or did you just think, no, I want the full richness here?
So providentially, I did have, my two oldest children had attended a classical high school that was not Catholic. It was an interdenominational Christian high school. And we learned a lot about that classical approach there, and we were also very frustrated because it didn't have a Catholic core to it, and the students couldn't quite put it all together. Even though most of the students who attended that school were Catholic, we watched them lose their faith when they went off to college and university, because they didn't have that grounding that really held it all together. And so we learned from that one, but then I also went around the country giving talks, and I was invited providentially to 3 different classical Catholic high schools in other cities. And they each took a slightly different approach, and I had the privilege of looking at each of their approaches and combined with the one that my 2 oldest children went to, and I kind of put together what I thought was the best thing from all of those, and then I added the secret sauce. G.K. Chesterton. And that's why there's nothing else like it. All right, there's one here, yes?
Thank you. Sorry. How do your fees that the parents have to pay compare to, say, comparable private schooling?
Yeah, we purposely keep our fees very low, and we are much lower than any other private school in our area. We have lots of ways of saving money. So we teach our schools how they can save money and keep their fees low. And we also teach them how to do fundraising. So it's very important that we keep education affordable. We're a pro-life, pro-family high school, and if you price families out of the market, then we're not pro-life and we're not pro-family.
So what about your wages for your teachers?
We give them living wages, absolutely. We take care of them, and that's just very important. In the beginning, there'll be some people working at a sacrificial wage when you're just getting started while you're still doing your fundraising, and they'll sacrifice themselves to get started, but at a certain point you have to start paying them, absolutely. All right, one more question, Father.
Yes, you mentioned the previous question about how in a lot of Catholic colleges they'll give up the faith once they leave the school. Has there been any studies or feedback or investigation as to how graduates of the Chesterton Academies fare in that respect? I mean, is there any idea as to what percentage of them do keep on practicing their faith?
Sure, yeah. We're actually, because we're still relatively new, but we are conducting those, trying to collect all that data right now while it's still manageable, and then we can continue to do that with each. So we're going to require each school to provide the data from their graduates. But I'll just tell you this, here's the sample test. Our school right now, at the seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, there are 7 seminarians who are graduates of our school. That was nice.